Hello! This recording is supposed to help you prepare for the next lecture in phonetics. Last time, I told you about what phonetics is and what phoneticians deal with. I told you that phonetics describes all the processes related to speech, all the properties of speech sounds, that is, acoustic, auditory, and articulatory processes. But before we start describing sounds, we have to go back to an even more basic question about how to identify the sounds that we want to describe. And it kind of sounds like a simple question. Well, of course, we all speak in sounds and we can all identify the sounds A and B and K and so on. So it sounds to us like it should be straightforward. But really what we're doing when we're talking about sounds like that is we're being biased by our ability to write. When we learn to write, we get this idea of separate sounds, each of which is represented by a separate letter. But in fact, when we speak, we don't speak in letters. And this is something that we'll talk about a lot when I see you in the next lecture. Sounds are not letters. So, for example, W, I, D, O, N, T, S, P, I, K, like this. Right? We don't separate the sounds. We don't speak like this, even in words. We don't always have pauses in between words. We usually don't. In fact, we don't even often speak in sentences. We speak in chunks of several words, like that. And those are separated by pauses. So when we want to have a look at sounds, the first thing that we need to realize is that sounds are not letters. And we have to go back to what sounds are. And you can definitely hear that difference between sounds and letters if I tell you a sentence in Polish, for example. So if I say, teraz powiem wam zdanie po polsku, żebyście zobaczyły, jak to brzmi. Would you be able to tell me instantly how many words there were in the sentence? You probably couldn't if you don't know the words. If you don't know the sounds so well, you won't be able to tell easily where one ends and another begins. So, what is sound? We said last time that sound is a variation of pressure traveling through air. So the first thing to see from that is that it's continuous. It's not little chunks of separate sounds. Speech sound, speech signal is continuous. It's one wave of sound traveling. Also, it's very fast. So when you speak, all the different sounds are very close together. And another thing about the speech signal is that it's very variable. The sounds are not always the same. They don't always have the same properties. So in writing, the sound, the letter L is always, the letter L is always L. It's always written in the same way. That doesn't mean that the sound L is always produced in the same way. To say a little bit more about this, when I say speech is rapid, I mean it's really rapid. It's faster than any other type of signal that we are used to processing. and we say anywhere between 100 to 350 words per minute. That means up to 20 to 30 segments or sounds, separate sounds per second. Now, with all the other types of signals, if I were to show you 20 different pictures in a second, you wouldn't be able to recognize all of them because it's just too quick. But for sounds, we are able to do it. We have perceptual abilities that allow us to process speech sounds. And this is partly because the sounds are linked together. So it's not the case that each sound has its own separate part of time in this rapid, fluent speech. What actually happens is that the properties of the sound spread to all the surrounding sounds. This is called co-articulation. So sounds can be kind of predicted by the properties of sounds that precede them. So we don't say each sound separately, they're linked, and so each of them contains some bits of the surrounding segment. So that helps us with recognizing the segments, even though they are so close together and so quick. But then the other difficulty is that speech signal is so variable. So it helps that you can hear properties of surrounding sounds in any individual sound, but it also makes things more difficult because that means that the sound B will sound different when it's next to A. When I say ba, that will be a different type of B than when I say bo. So sounds are affected by one another. And in fact, when people started looking into this, looking into how we perceive sounds, speech perception, what we found was that actually, if you put the same noise before different vowels, like E, A, and O, even though the noise is the same, it's computer generated, it's artificial, it's always the same, people hear it as a different speech sound. So the same sound before E, people hear as P, but before A, they hear it as K. So that's because they're not looking at every sound separately. They are looking at the sounds together. But that's not the only type of variation in speech. Pronunciation, of course, varies across speakers and within speakers. So different speakers say things in different ways. Native and non-native speakers, speakers from different areas and different dialects, and we're still able to understand them. But also within speakers, if I am anything can have an impact on the way I speak and consequently the properties of the sounds. So if I'm tired, I'm going to speak in a different way than when I'm very energetic and happy. And even though I may be saying the same words, they are going to sound different. Think about being ill. If you have a cold, if you have a sore throat, the sounds are going to be actually different. The sounds are different if you're eating or chewing gum. We can still talk with something in our mouth and it be perfectly understood. So what we're talking about is a continuous signal that is slightly different in all speakers, slightly different on all occasions, and very, very fast. So what you have here on this slide is a spectrogram, and it represents the recording of these four sounds. So v-yo. And what you're going to see here is that continuity. You're going to see that there isn't a clear boundary between, say, and y. Right? It changes somehow gradually, but where would you put the boundary between each of those sounds? This is what the speech signal actually is. And we want to study individual speech sounds because we know that this is how humans actually hear, perceive this signal. So when I see you in the second lecture, we will talk more about how to segment speech, how to describe sounds. And I hope by now, after this video, you have an idea about, or you've made the first step towards thinking about sounds, speech sounds, as just sounds rather than letters. And this is something that we'll talk about a lot more. And I look forward to seeing you in the lecture.